Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable and Learned gentleman. He started his remarks by saying that the Prime Minister should be here to answer his SO24, but then, slightly oddly, went immediately on to note that the Prime Minister had been here for just under an hour answering questions on the extension in particular. And indeed, if one takes it together with two urgent questions to my department this afternoon, an SO24 and much of Prime Minister's questions being taken also on these matters, whether that constitutes, as the member for Carshalton and Wallington amounts to International Happiness Day, I leave for others to determine. Of course, I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
The Minister might be wise, the Secretary of State might be wise to be aware of the fact that the Prime Minister's letter to Donald Tusk was not released until after Prime Minister's questions had started, and it wasn't released to this House, it was released to journalists. Isn't that the case?
Well, it's always good to take wisdom from all sources, and in terms of the letter, my understanding was it was placed in the House of Commons library. The precise timing of that, I think, given the length of time that Prime Minister's questions ran for, I think it probably was in the library whilst the Prime Minister was still answering questions, but with pleasure to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for giving way. But he has stood here describing how much time this House has spent talking about Brexit. But, Mr. Speaker, that is not the problem. The problem is we're 9 days away from leaving, and the government appears to have no policy. Isn't that the problem?
Yeah. Well, the Honourable Lady is correct that the House has spent a lot of time talking. What the House hasn't done is spent a lot of time deciding. And what we have seen is what the House is against. Of course I give way to the Honourable Lady.
You're giving way. There's a famous phrase that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've kicked this deal out twice. Historical precedent in this place says it can't come again. The EU has said they're not going to accept an extension unless something different comes forward. At what point will we accept we've got to go back to the people to put an end to this, because we can't keep going over and over?
Well, I do wonder if the Honourable Lady is describing her own front bench's policy, because they have put forward a proposal that the House has rejected, and yet seem to be intent on still putting forward the same policy. And if you speak to EU leaders, as indeed the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman I know will have done, what consistently comes across from senior figures in the EU is that the proposal put forward by the Leader of the Opposition is simply not credible. For example, he thinks that he can retain control over state aid. He thinks he can have a say on EU trade deals. These are things that are simply not on offer. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Secretary for giving way. It seems to be somehow sort of surprised that the House has been asking urgent questions today, has been seeking this debate, has been holding the Prime Minister to scrutiny, because this is the greatest crisis this country has faced since Suez. Countries around this world are looking at us, our international reputation in tatters, our businesses losing jobs and investment day by day. We're peeing millions of pounds down the drain that could be being spent on our public services. And he wonders why this House is asking questions? It's absurd.
With respect to the Honourable Gentleman, that wasn't the point I was making. Of course it's right that the House answers questions. Quite rightly, Mr. Speaker, you have always personally championed the House asking questions. Indeed, urgent questions is something to which I think quite rightly you take much pride. But the point is, I will in a moment, of course to the Chair of the Select Committee in a moment, but the point that the Honourable Gentleman is not addressing is that people around the world also look to this country to respect its democracy. They say that this House gave to the people the decision. Indeed, the government of the day wrote saying we would honour that decision. And I think he jumps us from a sedentary position, but what is damaging to our reputation around the world is a sense of us asking the people for a decision and then not acting. Now, of course, I give way to the Honourable.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Could he just explain to the House, give an answer to this very simple question? The Prime Minister has revealed today that she has applied for a short one-off extension. And yet, from that dispatch box, as we were already here, last week, her de facto deputy described such an extension as downright reckless. Could he explain to the House what the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster was thinking of when he made that statement?
Well, firstly, I refer the Right Honourable Gentleman to the comments that my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said on that very issue, because she was questioned more than once at Prime Minister's question, but it also relates to the point that his Right Honourable colleague, the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, said in his opening remarks, because at some length he kept referring in the motion to paragraph 2 of the motion last Thursday. And the point about the motion last Thursday was it was conditional on a meaningful vote taking place, which has not happened. What was also, just a second, because the Right Honourable Gentleman, as so often, raises a very serious point, and as Chair of the Select Committee, but also, if you look at the comments from my Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster, he was also talking in the context of what EU leaders would be willing to give. And if you look at the public statements from EU leaders, once again, they have said that there is very little appetite in Europe for a long extension, particularly when they see the uncertainty that we've had in this House. Of course, I've been waiting, Honourable.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he is very generous with his time. But it was put to the Minister just now that we have no plan. But the plan is the deal. And the only plan Labour have put to us is closer alignment with the customs union, which is basically staying in the EU. And that's not what the people voted for. The people did vote to come out. And all this obfuscating is only delaying that. And would he agree with me that we have to consider business, and the longer we dispute and discuss and debate and the less we come together, the more difficult it is for the economy and our businesses?
Well, my honourable friend is right to say that businesses in Taunton Deane, and I'm sure elsewhere in the constituency, have made clear their desire to see this deal backed, their desire to address the uncertainty that we face. And again, people have been saying to my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that she should compromise. She has compromised. She didn't want to have an extension. She has listened and acted on that. But the House itself has to compromise. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
He's being very generous. Is it not the case that the only way to avoid a no deal is to vote for the withdrawal agreement? The only way to vote against a long extension is to vote for the withdrawal agreement. And is there not some intellectual inconsistency in the opposition's argument? And that is, they say they want to put a vote back to the people based upon a deal, but they're suggesting the Prime Minister doesn't really want a deal and wants no deal. That is not even consistent.
Well, my honourable friend is right in that the only deal, not just that the Prime Minister says, but the only deal the EU themselves say is on the table after over 2 years of negotiation is the deal that she has negotiated. Of course, I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister very much for giving way. He says that the House isn't very good at deciding what it wants, but we are crying out for the opportunity to vote for what we want. And he said that countries around the world are looking to us to respect democracy. Will he respect democracy in this House and give us the chance to vote on it now?
So, the Right Honourable Gentleman says about respecting votes and whether the House has had an opportunity to vote on issues. His party wants a second referendum, a people's vote, and yet we had a vote on that issue last Thursday. Indeed, my shadow opposite number didn't vote for the people's vote. So the point is, if he's going to practice what he preaches, then we respect. We had a vote on the people's vote last Thursday. The House spoke on that. I give one way and then I make more time. So the Honourable Lady.
Thank the Secretary of State for giving way. The Prime Minister has proven she's not prepared to give us the opportunity to consider alternative options in the light of the failure of her deal twice. She is putting us in danger of crashing out by the end of next week, and that means a real danger of food shortages, medicine shortages and potentially civil unrest because of the prospect of crashing out. Can the Secretary of State explain to the House whether his government, if that is the case, whether his government will commit to revoking Article 50 in that context?
The the Honourable Lady is usually one of the most forensic questioners in the House, but on this issue, I'm afraid I fundamentally disagree, because firstly, we have made very clear as a government that we won't revoke, because we are committed to delivering on the referendum result. But secondly, again, it's a slightly illogical charge of the Honourable Lady to say that the Prime Minister is seeking to crash out on the 29th when she has today sought an extension to the end of June. I give away once more to the Honourable Gentleman, and then I will make some progress.
Grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. One of the reasons why we wanted the Prime Minister here this afternoon is because whatever her shortcomings, we can at least trust that when she stands at the dispatch box, she believes every word she says, which cannot be said for the Secretary of State, who can make one argument in one breath and then vote in the other division lobby in the other. Isn't the case. The reason why he shouldn't be laughing this afternoon, because, by the way, people are laughing at him, not with him, is because we are 9 days away from crashing out with no deal. There is no sign of a plan from the government, and even the extension letter the Prime Minister submitted fails that basic test of explaining why an extension is required. Isn't the simple reason that there is no plan? If there is a plan, what is it, Stan?
I think the Honourable Gentleman is woefully misrepresenting the way that the amendable motion played last Thursday, the fact that the amendments were defeated and we'd given a further commitment to an amendable motion on the 25th. And perhaps his frustration is displaced from his own frustration with his front bench, because what we haven't had from the Leader of the Opposition is clarity in terms of when a second referendum will be put. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm conscious that this is a time-limited debate, and so I should make some progress. We have requested an extension under Article 53 of the Treaty of the European Union until the 30th of June, as it's now not possible to ratify the deal before the 29th of March. The request to the President of the European Council, delivered today by my right honourable friend the Prime Minister, gives us a final chance to uphold the democratic responsibility to deliver Brexit in an orderly way. As requested, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has set out the intentions of this government, and that letter has been placed in the library. I'll give way once more, given its right honourable gentleman.
Very grateful to my right honourable friend. And would he confirm that we've had plenty of time to consider all the other options, and that throughout the EU withdrawal bill, a lot of options were tabled and vetoed, and then again last week we had a series of indicative votes. I think everyone has been looked at, and the truth is they were voted down.
Well, my right honourable friend is right in that the suggestion that this House has not had sufficient time, which is one of the points put earlier, self-evidently doesn't reflect the extensive debates that we have held. The idea that the House hasn't had an opportunity to express its will when it has done so repeatedly on issues, including last Thursday, is simply not credible. Well, given it as it's the Honourable Lady in particular, I should make some progress. I am conscious, Mr. Speaker will know that I'm taking too many interventions, but for the Honourable Lady, of course.
Thank the Secretary of State for taking a further intervention. He will know that this House has rejected the Prime Minister's deal now twice by historic margins. It's neither the will of the House nor the will of the public. And it's also rejected very resoundingly, leaving with no deal. But what we haven't yet had is, in government time, an opportunity to do just what the Right Honourable Gentleman asks, for the House to give an indication of what it would support. So will he support bringing forward the opportunity to give the opinion on indicative votes in the next week, preferably on Saturday?
I'm not sure on Saturday would be the most popular of responses with colleagues across the House, but we have given a commitment, as the Honourable Lady knows, to a meaningful vote on Monday, and obviously following that there will be opportunities for the House to have their say. But let me make some progress. And Mr. Speaker, any extension is the means, not the end. But any extension of whatever length does not allow this House to escape its responsibilities to decide where it stands, its commitment to deliver on the decision it gave to the British people, or whether it's going to walk away from doing so. Nor should any extension mean that a guerrilla campaign can be run to overturn the result of that referendum and frustrate the will of those who voted to leave. I disagree with, he's not in his place, but I disagree with the Shadow Chancellor when he suggested that any extension should be open-ended. Indeed, I think his comment was it should be as long as necessary. And indeed, he was at odds with his own front bench, the honourable member for Islington South and Finsbury, who just the day before said that Labour would only back an extension to July because it would be inappropriate for us, Labour, to stand for the European Parliament. Indeed, Mr Speaker, an open-ended delay would mean disregarding the votes of the 17.4 million people who voted to leave. We now need to use any additional time to ensure an orderly Brexit is delivered. The Leader of the Opposition has not said to date how long an extension he is seeking. I don't know whether the front bench wish to use the opportunity of this emergency debate to put on record exactly how long an extension they are looking for. I suppose, is the Honourable Lady going to clarify what the Labour policy is on the length of its extension? I look forward to her date.
Thank the Secretary of State for giving way. The North East Chamber of Commerce have stated that their members do not want a messy and disorderly exit from the EU, and they are perplexed that the government has allowed a no-deal scenario to be seen as a credible outcome, and they have asked that Article 50 to be extended for a sufficient period of time to enable the government to fully engage with businesses and stakeholders to form a consensus on Brexit. Will the Secretary of State stop ignoring the will of thousands of job creators in the North East?
What is quite remarkable about that intervention is it is chambers of commerce up and down the country that have been saying back the Prime Minister's deal because they want the certainty that the deal offers. So I'm very grateful for her for bringing the House's attention to the voice of business, but it's not a voice that usually gets much of a hearing on the benches opposite. I do, Mr Speaker, do note, however, that she did duck the challenge, and indeed I've still not heard anyone from the opposition front bench actually tell us how long an extension they are seeking. Well, we have a volunteer. We have a volunteer. We look forward to the date from the honourable gentleman.
Given that it's clear from the historic votes we cannot agree the deal in this House, and given it's clear that the government thinks that they're confidently saying they're actually displaying what the people voted for, surely they have the confidence to put that back to the people, in which case the extension should be long enough to be longer than the 22 weeks for a public vote, which is 5 months, of course, and so I would suggest 9 months would be an appropriate thing to keep all our options open.
The Prime Minister, Speaker, is not even persuaded his own front bench of his own position, because he's saying now that he wants a 9-month extension. He's saying he wants a 9-month extension, and yet we don't have any clarity from the bench opposite. He's further saying that he wants. He's further saying that he wants time for a second referendum, yet I've yet to hear clarity as to what the question would be. Would it be 2 questions or 3? Would remain be on the ballot or leave be on the ballot? And even if he were to, well, I've given way once, and I think the Father of the House wants to come in, so I will obviously let the Father of the House in a moment. But even the question is unclear. The length of time it would take is unclear, and he can't persuade his own front bench of his own policy.
My honourable friend, we're suddenly wandering around the point here of how long and what for we're having an extension, with both front benches, with respect, not being altogether clear. On the various basic facts, one is if the withdrawal agreement is defeated again, that can't be the agenda for any further extension. Secondly, that useful negotiations in Brussels are going to be very limited for the next few months because they're electing a new parliament and they're appointing a new commission, so you won't really be able to get underway till sometime in the summer. If we use that time for the British generally, parliament and government, to come to some conclusions about what we're pursuing, we're still going to see some time after that, and I'd have thought the end of the year is the very minimum time that's going to be needed to sort out this crisis in a sensible, constructive way from now on, which we haven't done this far.
Well, the Father of the House makes a very reasonable and well-made point, which is, and it's a point indeed I have made to some of my colleagues who voted to leave in the referendum, which is if they continue to fail to support a meaningful vote, then the House may opt for a softer form of Brexit, and I think that is a risk that many who campaign to leave need to be mindful of. Now, the equivalent risk to that, Mr. Speaker, for those who may cling to that life raft as a preferable option, is that it remains unclear whether the House would then ratify that, given the way that the withdrawal agreement bill would obviously need to be passed. That is a major piece of legislation, and the sustainability of that coalition would come into question with the risk of a no-deal outcome subsequently. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, for giving way. Given that we will just accept that his favoured outcome is the acceptance of the Prime Minister's deal, if that can't happen, what's his second order of preference? I don't think he sounds very much in favour of extension. We then have the possibility, the only two sovereign choices, the only two independent choices we've made here are no deal or revocation of Article 50. Which one would he go for? Over the cliff or turn back?
I forgive the honourable gentleman for not having listened necessarily to various media rounds where I've answered that question already on multiple occasions. So if you take it to its absolute extreme, and I think I've been very clear that I think both outcomes, no Brexit, I think is hugely damaging democratically, and I think a no-deal outcome is very damaging economically. No, well, he chances there. Of the two, I think no Brexit is more fundamentally damaging to our country, and I have made my view clear. Now, that is notwithstanding also being clear that no deal would be economically disruptive, but I think would also have difficulties for our union, not least because the honourable gentleman would seek to exploit a no deal in terms of a future Indy referendum. Now, I think both outcomes are undesirable, but as the Prime Minister has repeatedly set out at his dispatch box, there are only three outcomes. However much Parliament might want to kick the can down the road and delay this, there are only three outcomes that we can have, which is either no Brexit, no deal, or to back the Prime Minister's deal, which the EU themselves have made clear is the only option. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm conscious that I give way once more and then I'll wrap up because I'm conscious of time.
In his last speech in the House, the Secretary of State commended a government motion to us, and then he went and voted against it. Will he explain to us what on earth he was doing?
Of course. Well, again, we touched on this in various media rounds I did yesterday. So the point was, if you look at the entirety of my speech, all of my speech except the final line, was addressing what was the substance before the House that day, which was the amendments, and in particular the amendment from the chair of the Exiting the European Union Committee, which would have taken control of the order paper away from the government, which I happen to feel, and the government felt, was not just damaging to Brexit, but constitutionally significant. And as the right honourable gentleman will know, the government won that vote by 2. There were 3 votes. What was reported was that the conclusion of the speech was quickly followed by a vote. What actually happened was the amendable motion was defeated. The 3 amendments were defeated, and it was only at that point, following a commitment to a further amendable motion on the 25th of the month, that the Chief Whip was in a position to change the whip. So it's not just my view that changed, it's actually the Chief Whip's and the government's view. Well, he chunters away, he asked a question, he's getting a straight answer. Mr. Speaker, I'm conscious we've given quite a lot of interventions. So 3 years after the country voted to leave, Parliament continues to...
Order. Point of order. Sit down. Point of order, Barry Sherman.
Almost surreptitiously, the Secretary of State announced a couple of sentences ago that we were going to have the next meaningful vote on Monday.
Yes.
That has not been announced in this House. I had no knowledge of it. And the fact that the Father of the House has been making sensible suggestions how we can together progress what we want to get out of the deliberations, we're going to be confounded by the fact that the meaningful vote being brought forward to Monday.
Perhaps I should just say, my understanding... Order. Sorry? Well, we'll hear the right honourable gentleman in a moment. My understanding was that the Secretary of State had specified a meaningful vote on Monday. I thought he used the words meaningful vote, but I may be incorrect, and the right honourable gentleman can clarify. It is order. It is certainly the case that we are due to have a motion pursuant to earlier resolutions of the House, and that it is due by Monday. And I believe it is listed in the remaining orders. My expectation is that there will be such a motion on Monday. Perhaps the right honourable gentleman could helpfully clarify to the House precisely what the government does intend for Monday, assuming that it knows, and what it does not. The Secretary of State.
Very happy to clarify. What I was referring to was the amendable motion that the government has committed to give, and I refer back to the remarks of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who made that commitment, and that is on the record in Hansard. Mr. Speaker, 3 years after the country voted to leave, Parliament continues to debate the manner in which we should leave. While some, having stood on a manifesto to respect the result, worked tirelessly to frustrate that decision. The EU have repeatedly made clear that after 2.5 years of negotiation, the Prime Minister's deal is the only...
Point of order. I'm sorry to have to interrupt the right honourable gentleman, but if there's a point of order, I'm mistaken. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Speaker, but I'm afraid I'm not satisfied with that, and I wondered whether it was possible to check, given that the importance of that in the relation to the business next week, whether it was possible to check with the official reporters with Hansard as to what the Secretary of State actually did say, because he said lots of different things at dispatch before, left the House in confusion, and there are all sorts of rumours swirling around about what is happening on Monday next week.
Yeah. Well, it would be difficult to get it immediately, although those who take down what is said verbatim in this House do work extremely skillfully and conscientiously. It is therefore reasonable to expect that what was said will wing its way to the chair before very long. Moreover, if the Secretary of State in any sense misspoke, it is open to him to clarify what he meant.
So, Mr. Speaker, I mean, if I did misspeak, then of course I'll apologise to the House and seek to clarify the record. I think the point being made was about a meaningful vote. That is the reference back. I've just done it again. Was about an amendable motion, and so that was the point. And I think the Shadow Secretary of State accepts that point. So we were referring to an amendable motion. Of course, I give way.
The Secretary of State very kind, and I did put him up on the point of order because I did think I heard what he said.
You did.
But could he just address himself to the concern the Father of the House keeps bringing? Yes. That if we rush into this, we won't have time to do exactly what the Father of the House has been saying, give us some objectives that then we know that we're going to Europe to say, in this extra time we have, this is what we think is achievable. This House could come together and do that. If we have too early a vote, we'll have no chance to get our House in order and to do that.
But the right honourable is always very reasonable in the interventions he makes. So first, I'm grateful to the opportunity to clarify on the record that it was the amendable motion that I was referring to, but to the substance of his point, then we will come up back on Monday and set out at the dispatch box exactly how we will honour the commitment that was given by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And conscious I've used a lot of time, Mr. Speaker, so to conclude, well,
I'm very grateful for the Secretary of State for giving way. The Secretary of State, a few moments ago, advocated no deal over no Brexit. That is wholly irresponsible and will cause huge problems in our communities for our businesses. And this short extension only pushes a no-deal brick wall just a few months down the line. Will he confirm that he is not advocating no deal over no Brexit? Because that is not what we want.
Well, what I'm advocating is a deal, because I accept either a no Brexit or a no-deal outcome is highly undesirable. But I think going back on the referendum result, going back on the Honourable Lady's own manifesto pledge at the last election, I think would be hugely damaging to our democracy and to public trust in this institution. Mr Speaker, in seeking a short extension to the 30th of June, the government intends to bring back the deal to this House as the best means of ensuring an orderly exit. If, however, the House continues to refuse a deal, or alternatives through other votes do not provide sufficient numbers for both a deal for ratification, then it is clear the House will need to decide between no deal, a softer Brexit, or no Brexit at all. Some members of this House may prefer a general election to no deal, which is why those of my colleagues counting on a no deal outcome are set to be frustrated. Others who think Brexit can be stopped through holding European parliamentary elections, enabling further long extensions, may also find some members of this House prefer other outcomes to that. The best way, Mr Speaker, of this House delivering on the will of the people in the referendum is to support the Prime Minister's deal, and that is the way forward and how the government should proceed.